Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG CV. My name is LaQuantia Goodman, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. Office hours recordings are on the California ESG CV Past Trainings webpage. A copy of the slide deck and recording will also be emailed to you. Next slide. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered in the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the question and answer session. Next slide. Our agenda for today's office hour session. ESG and ESG CV updates and resources, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESG CV question and answers, and our Spotlight Series presentation, ESG Annual Monitoring. Next slide. I'll now pass it to Connie for some ESG updates.
Good morning, everybody. Our homelessness prevention one-time NOPA will be issued in approximately 3, maybe 4 weeks, but we're aiming for mid-September, so not far away. This is a one-time special NOPA. Homelessness prevention is the only activity. It will be over the counter, which means first applications in, first review, and if they're approved, we will go on and issue a contract. Applicants must have approved HP policies and procedures, that's HCD approved policies and procedures to run the program and to get funded. So if you are thinking this is something that would be of interest to your jurisdiction and you do not yet have HCD approved homelessness prevention policies and procedures and want some assistance, please reach out to us and we will schedule a meeting and we will walk you through some of the requirements and what should be in your policies and procedures for this particular activity. Funds expire September 7th, 2024. So these funds, which will be approximately $1.7 million in this NOPA, come from disencumbered 2020 ESG annual funds. So we've been given approval to go ahead and put this into this HP NOPA, which we're really excited about, and that should be coming shortly. We want to also just assure everybody that we will be holding a training webinar shortly before we drop this NOPA next month. We're pulling that together right now. I want to make sure everybody's prepared and really understands how to run a homelessness prevention program. It's not an eviction prevention program. So we will be doing a training webinar and you'll be communicating the time of that probably hopefully in the next week or so to you. Next slide, please. Again, if you think there's a need in your community for HP funding and you're interested, but you have some questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the ESG NOPA inbox. You can contact your ESG rep. You can always send me an email. Be happy to visit with you and we'll do everything we can to try to help prepare you for this. And we'll go to the next slide. We're going to change subjects to our guideline development. So ESG guideline development. We have been given legislative authority to replace our current ESG state regulations with guidelines. We will be issuing these new guidelines and have them in place. Our goal is by mid next year, by the end of July 2024. The reason that we want to go to guidelines is to deploy funds faster to you, our subrecipients. Our annual funds are 24 months from the date that HUD signs our contract, our grant fund contract each year, and the 24-month time starts ticking. So if you did not attend any of the listening sessions, we've had listening sessions over the past few weeks. We had a survey out for about a month. And you're interested or not quite sure what this is all about, please write an email to our ESG guidelines at hcd.ca.gov inbox, and we will respond very quickly to you, and always happy to chat with you at a Teams meeting. We're excited to get this rolling out. We've got a lot of different proposals and concepts. I've had some great feedback that we're also weaving into and firming up the final development of the guidelines. And again, we will be communicating to you the next few weeks what changes after you've heard the listening sessions, what we're proposing, and now what's it's going to form, what's going to come into. So anyway, I want to just remind everybody about that. And I will be turning the next slide over to Anthony.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm not sure if they mentioned it in the opening, but I'm having some audio issues. I can speak, my microphone's working, but I can't hear anything. So I'm having to follow just by looking at the screen on one side, and on this screen, I'm looking at prompts from the team for me to speak. So bear with me if I'm doing this back and forth. Just some quick updates here. The 2021 contracts expenditure deadline is quickly approaching. It's just next week. So keep an eye out for that. Let us know if you need any help submitting those RFS. Hopefully you have them all in and you don't have to worry about this. But if you don't, please reach out to us and we can help you get those taken care of. We can get them processed, all within the expenditure deadline date. The 2022 ESG award announcement that has been made. The contracts are in progress. We've probably got about 25% of them processed so far. Our contracts division is going through them one by one. You should be receiving notification anytime, so check your eCivis notifications and also your email for a notice from our contracts division. The 2023 ESG Annual NOFA was dropped last week. Woohoo! We're happy about that. And we have webinars scheduled for next Tuesday. Please go ahead and register for those. We've got a lot of people signed up so far. We are looking forward to those. The applications are live and they will be due in eCivis on the 16th of October by 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. One caveat, we do know that there are some challenges with the COC application. We are working on that and we will let you know as soon as we get that resolved. And then let's see, is there next slide? And there's just some more information on the BOS webinar. It's on the 29th at 10 a.m. You can follow that link to the registration on Zoom, and the COC webinar also on the 29th at 1 p.m. And once again, follow that meeting registration link. And as always, down below, you can click there and that will take you to the ESG webpage. Next slide, please. And on the ESG homepage, we have that ribbon that sits right in the middle of the page with the NOFA link there, to apply link there, and also with that fancy yellow arrow there, that's where you can register for the webinars. Click on that, it'll lead you to another page. Next slide, please. And also another fancy yellow arrow there, and all the way down at the bottom of the webinar page, you'll see the link for the 2023 ESG COC NOFA and workshop, and also the BOS NOFA and workshop. And next slide, please. And we've updated this page with the links, and it's an extremely helpful web page. It's under the resources tab on the ESG webpage, and you can find all kinds of great stuff in terms of managing your grants, your programs, and if you have any questions on ESG policies or any programmatic elements. Next slide, please. And you can always do it the old-fashioned way as well. Reach out to your team representatives, Diana, Sam, Giovanni, Tuesday, and myself, or the ESG NOFA inbox, and we will respond to your questions as quickly as we can. And with that, I will turn it back over to Aquantia.
I'm going to give Anthony a second to check out those questions so that he can answer those questions for us. We had a couple questions come in about some of the ESG material that Anthony just covered. One question was from Valentine, and the expenditure deadline is 8/31/2023. And she's asking what is the last day to submit RFFs? And the last day to submit RFFs is also August 31st, 2023. And we'll round back to that question from Micah as soon as Tony gets around to it. Now for the ESG CV updates. Reminders for performance milestones. All program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, all must be expended by September 30th, 2023. So in a little over a month, we have to make sure that all of those funds for the program components are expended. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. And all final RFFs must be submitted no later than November 15th, 2023. And of course, you don't have to wait for that November 15th deadline. You want to make sure you get that RFF, that final RFF in, timely before then so that it can pass through all the levels of approval by November 15th. Next slide, please. Our upcoming office hours for next week, our topic is to be determined, so be on the lookout for that when we get it. Next slide. Here are the links for our training site and to view past trainings. They'll be dropped in the chat and will also be sent out with the slide deck. So please access those as needed. Next slide. And have a question here to confirm what is the deadline for the final RFF to be submitted, 8/31 or 9/15? Valentine, will you come off mute or drop it in the chat to tell me exactly, are you referring to the ESG deadline or the ESG CV deadline? The ESG CV deadline for the final RFF is November 15th. So the ESG CV deadline is November 15th. All right, I don't see any other. Hold on, I'm sorry, we do have another question. Regarding the match supporting documentation, which this is for ESG. We'll get this over to Tony and Sarah so that they can answer that, and we'll come back and answer it for you, Amanda. We're not seeing any other questions at this time. Next slide. If you do have further questions, please contact your annual ESG rep or reach out via ESG NOFA at hcd.ca.gov or reach out to your ESG CV grant administrator for questions. Next slide. We will now turn our spotlight presentation over to Anthony for ESG Annual Monitoring.
Thank you, LaQuantia, and hello again, everyone. And my apologies for these technical difficulties. This is very interesting as I can't hear. Like I said, I have to keep watching. So you'll see a little delay as I see. Is it my turn to talk? Okay, or next slide. So welcome. And today we are going to talk about the ESG Annual Monitoring Program. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Anthony Zepeda. I'm with the ESG team. I'm the lead staff for our annual monitoring effort. I've been serving in this role for the last couple of years. And I'm very happy to speak with you today. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Today is really just going to be a broad overview of the annual ESG monitoring process. We're getting ready to kick off the process this month. And we present this information every year, as well as in coordination with the ICF training series. So for many of you, this will be a refresher. For others, it may be the first time that you are hearing about the ESG annual monitoring program. And for those of you, this will be a broad, high-level presentation to introduce the program and the requirements and process, the timeline, the steps. We'll go through pretty quickly and save plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session. Next slide, please. So as annual monitoring, what overview? Well, the fancy way of saying it, we're the state recipient and the administrative agency for HUD's federal ESG funds. And as a result, HCD, we are responsible for ensuring that ESG funded activities are implemented in accordance with all of the programmatic regulations and grant requirements. As part of our administrative obligations, we are required to annually monitor our ESG subrecipients. And just a little side note here, for those of you who may not be aware, if you are a subrecipient of our ESG funds, you are also required to monitor your subrecipients. So if you're an agency that contracts out your ESG implementation and your program to subcontractors or subrecipients, you're responsible for monitoring them as well to ensure that they're meeting all of the programmatic requirements and financial obligations. Just a little background is this is something we would regularly do with HCD with our subrecipients in previous years. However, in 2019, we had a staff reorganization, which kind of put it on the back burner, and then with the idea that we would get back to it in 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020, so it was put on the back burner in 2020 as well. But come 2021, HUD said, you got to start monitoring again. And we couldn't go out due to the state of emergency to field offices and go through your files and sit with you and talk with you. So we had to create a remote monitoring program, and working with our team at ICF, we were able to put that together. We were put it together in 2021, successfully implemented it, and went through our first round of monitoring with some subrecipients in 2021. And this year, we're starting our second year, and it's running pretty smoothly. We're pretty confident in the process, and we always welcome feedback from our subrecipients. Next slide, please. So what is the overall purpose of monitoring? Pretty clear right there on the slide. We have to ensure that our subrecipients are compliant with all of the regulations, both federal, state, and contractually, regarding the administrative requirements, financial compliance, programmatic operations, and also you're seeing this more and more in terms of performance objectives and performance metrics. We have to make sure that you're achieving your stated performance objectives on time and within budget. Next slide, please. So that's what monitoring is. What we really want to stress, though, of what monitoring is not. For those of you who are new to this process, this isn't a financial audit. To the best of my knowledge, no one on our team is a certified public accountant. We can't go through and do an audit. It's more of a review and programmatic review. We will look at financial records, which we'll cover in the next slide, but not to the level or detail that an agency or organization has to go through with a financial audit. It's definitely not a static top-down set of directives. And what I mean by that is it's just not, we have a few hard, fast rules, but we really want to see how you're implementing it. How is your agency implementing the ESG program? And to ensure that it's consistent with what the regulations and requirements that are laid out in the federal regs, the state regs, and in your contractual agreement with HCD. And really, this last one I really want to stress, because we do get some nervousness from our subrecipients when we go through this. This isn't a gotcha. We're not sitting here just like, getting our pen and paper out, writing it down, this is bad on you. No, it's a conversation. It's a dialogue. We want to identify and any errors or deficiencies that you may have in your program. And then that gives us an opportunity to design and implement corrective action plans to ensure that moving forward, you're in compliance with the federal and state and contractual obligations. And on a positive note, it's also a chance for us to identify and recognize best practices by subrecipients. And we do see that. We do, last year we saw some great best practices that are out there that we can then share with other subrecipients, and how to better manage, all of the requirements that are associated with this sometimes little grant. So next slide, which, leads into this next set of bullet points here. What the program is, it's an ongoing process. It's evolving. It involves a lot of communication and ongoing evaluation between HCD, their subrecipients, and the subrecipients and their subs. It's a cooperative endeavor. We're working together. We're working side by side in this. We're all on the same page. We don't want to be just the administrative, always nagging agency. We're here for the same reason that you are. We want to house the homeless. We want to get people off the streets, and we have to work in the same capacity as you do. We are monitored by HUD. HUD looks to make sure that we are monitoring our subrecipients and the subrecipients. And if we are not monitoring, we go through the same process. We can get dinged, and we have to have corrective action plans and so on. It's also a conversation. You'll find out as we move through this process, you're going to be talking to me a lot. You're going to be talking to your HCD representative assigned to do the monitoring a lot. It's a back and forth, and it's a dialogue, and it's ongoing. And related to that, for those of you who've gone through the mini monitoring program, the mini monitoring program was created as part of our annual monitoring program. And that was a way to kind of get ahead of the monitoring process. So it's not just once a year, it's every RFF. Every RFF, we're going to request backup documentation. We may request client files. We may request additional financial documentation, just to ensure that our subrecipients are not making many mistakes that can lead to negative results down the road in the annual monitoring. It also familiarizes our subrecipients with the annual monitoring process. They're really not that different. It's just a much deeper dive, a much more comprehensive dive. So next slide, please. And I will take a breath and look over at my dialogue to see if there's anything notes here. Okay, so I'm okay. As I said, I'm monitoring a chat to see if anything's coming up while I'm talking to you, because I can't hear anything. I can only speak right now. So annual ESG monitoring, the process. We could only go out just recently. So we are still moving forward with the remote monitoring conducted offsite. What I mean by going in and out is the state of emergency was just recently lifted earlier this year. And until that was lifted, we couldn't go out to client offices. And now with the remote program, perhaps eventually we'll go back to field office reviews. But for now, we're sticking with the remote online monitoring. We use our HCD ESG secure SharePoint site. We'll get into that in detail. I'll refer to a lot in this presentation. And that is just a secure SharePoint site where it houses all of the monitoring data. It's the same site that is used for many monitoring. You'll just have a new set of folders for the annual monitoring process this year. And overall, it's a big picture. We review your organizational documents, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. We also review each program component awarded. We take a close look at selected RFFs that were submitted for that contract year. And then the entire process takes about 3 months, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. It just depends, but just in general, about 3 months. So we'll touch on the schedule a little bit more in upcoming slides. And let me I'm just looking at a question that came up. Does HUD have template? Yes. I see that there's a question for, does HUD have a template of questions for the fiscal monitoring? They do. And I will touch on that in, I believe it's the next 2 slides. Next slide, please. So digging down a little deeper here in terms of the scope and the process. The monitoring review for annual ESG monitoring includes a review of all awarded ESG components for a particular contract year. So if you're awarded rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, HMIS, we will be looking at all of those and reviewing them. In addition, we will review selected RFFs related to that contract year and we will be requesting backup documentation, just like with mini monitoring. In addition, we will be requesting client files and just much more of a deep dive than what we do in the mini monitoring. All of this information will be outlined in an intent to monitor letter, which I will cover in an upcoming slide. A lot of upcoming slides here, I know. But the intent to monitor letter is going to lay out everything. And regarding your question about the HUD template of questions for fiscal monitoring, for a broad overview, you can click on the link that is provided on this slide, and it's broken down by chapter, and you can go to the subrecipient financial grant management section and take a look. In addition, I would also recommend reaching out to your representative who will be conducting the monitoring, or to me, or to the NOFA inbox. I'd be happy to send you some cheat sheets as well. We do have resources on our ESG web page under the resources tab. In particular, the ESG program manual is very helpful. However, if you're not finding what you're looking for, reach out to us and I can send you a little more focus documentation if you need it. And next slide, please. So, and continuing with the scope in terms of the organizational documents, we're going to be looking at a variety of organizational documents, which we will lay out on the intent to monitor letter, but some examples include the written standards that you are using, either the COC or the BOS is applicable, your ESG operating policies and procedures. We'll get down into client files and your ESG program policies and procedures, and what are your intake procedures? Are you meeting the coordination requirements? We'll look at your staff organizational chart. We'll look at your financial documentation in terms of both what is outlined in ESG regulation and also CFR 200, the big mega waiver I can't think of the word right now, but the gigantic document that outlines all financial requirements for grantees from the federal government. And next slide, please. And if you could just scroll, there we go, just right there. This is a great timeline slide, originally put together by our team at ICF. They always put together great little tools for us to use with our subrecipients. This slide is going to be a big, broad overview of the annual monitoring process for 2023. And this first arrow that has come up is the intent to monitor letter, but I just want to step back one step here, and that prior to us sending out the letter, you're going to be receiving an email or telephone call from me or your program rep. What we're going to do is set up a monitoring kickoff meeting where we're going to go through this letter. We're going to go through the monitoring process. We're going to have a presentation very similar to this one, but it's going to be much more detailed and much more subrecipient specific for your organization. Once we have that set up, in the next 2 weeks, we will send the next intent to monitoring letter. The intent to monitor letter is going to outline the contract numbers, the contract year to be monitored, the program components that will be monitored. It'll identify the ESG staff member that will be conducting the monitoring, and it will also provide a timeline and give you a chance to take in the process. And if you have any questions, I'll answer those in the kickoff meeting. Let's see, and next, scroll down to the next there. And from August to September, that will be the client upload period. We will in the intent to monitor letter, we will be requesting documentation, primarily your organizational documents, your financial organization documents, and the RFFs that we will be looking at, HMIS case files, all of the documentation that we will be reviewing during the monitoring effort. You'll have about approximately 30 days to upload that to the HCD Secure SharePoint website. And we will be working closely with you throughout that process. So we will also identify which staff members are going to need access to the Secure SharePoint website. It's a read-only, upload-only access. And so you'll have key staff members that will have the ability to upload your documents there. And let's see. Next, there we go. So we will conduct the review from approximately September through October. And this is when we will do the heart of the monitoring. We are guided in this process by a set of HUD exhibits or guidelines for each specific components, reaching, the specific components, HMIS, rapid rehousing, but they also have the subrecipient grant management and so on. We will go through those and monitor, and the whole process takes about a month. And during that time, we will be communicating with you back and forth. Anything that we find, we will give you a chance to address it during this process and try to limit the amount of either findings or concerns that may result as a part of the process. So next, there we go. And which is here. In October, we're going to identify any preliminary concerns or findings. We're going to be meeting with you. We're going to have a meeting to go over what we have found in our review of your documentation and review of your program, your ESG program. And it will also give you a chance, sometimes we've run into where we couldn't find certain things in a file, but they just were missed in the upload. The client had the file. After our meeting, they were able to upload the file, so we did not have to check that. We could just check that off the box when we were sending out our letter. And so let's see your next bullet point, please. And then October, November, you'll have 30 days your organization will have 30 days to respond, if necessary or as necessary, to any concerns or findings that were identified during this process. And next bullet, please. And the monitoring process will end sometime in November 2023, early December 2023. A little asterisk there, just in case we really haven't run into any major problems. Everything that we run into prior years, we can address. It doesn't extend the process, but I put that there just in case that maybe runs into 2024. And next slide, please. So the next set of slides are really to address the common monitoring issues that we run into just across the board, whether you're a COC, VOS, and so on. The biggest one, as you may or may not know, is PII, personally identifying information. HUD had a big push on this in the last few years, as you may know, from the many monitoring efforts, and HCD as well. We have policies about PII, and you cannot have any PII on the documents that you submit to us, even for monitoring. So this is a slide that Connie used a couple of weeks ago when she was doing the other NOFA, and it's just a good refresher in that you provide the HMIS number or any other unique ID number for clients. Do not provide their name on their DERS. When providing backup documentation, redact all personal information, and subrecipients are required to redact all PII on all documents submitted to their grantees unless their grantee explicitly requests an unredacted document. And what does redacted mean? That's on the next slide. And I generally don't like to read slides, but on these, it's so important, I'm going to read this. Redacted means that PII has been permanently erased, covered, or removed such that it cannot be retrieved by anyone in possession of the document. And this is often accompanied by using correction fluid, correction tape, or an opaque black marker. There is a little more instruction there at the bottom, and about an opaque black marker and a copier. However, this is something we're going to go over in detail in the kickoff meeting, and we can give you some tips on that. And also, as we're going through the process when you're uploading, if you have questions on this, just let us know, and we can help you before you upload it. As mentioned before, we have the HCD Secure SharePoint website. It meets all the regulatory requirements for privacy and PII. We upload it there. As a side note, we cannot accept anything sent by email. So it has to be uploaded as part of this monitoring process and the mini monitoring process. And next slide, please. And I'm going to glance over quick to see if there is a question. No questions, great. So continuing with the common monitoring issues themes here, excuse me, documentation and record keeping. We get a lot of questions on this. This is nothing new to our subrecipients. I think we've had probably 5+ trainings on this, and I think David Munoz just brought it up recently in his presentation. For those of you with finance departments and contract departments, they're very well versed on this, excuse me. But for those of you who don't, Here are some great links and resources for you to take a look and bring you up to speed on the requirements. And it's also helpful to review the contract between your organization and HCD in terms of the financial documentation requirements, especially in terms of record keeping. And next slide, please. Okay, these next slides, I'm going to go through pretty quickly as they serve as a reference for you as you prepare for monitoring. And these are some slides that ICF prepared last year for their monitoring effort. And they represent the most common areas of confusion for our subrecipients, especially in terms of monitoring, as well as most of the errors that we find when we're conducting our monitoring reviews. They're related all on these common themes. So you don't have to memorize them all today. You have these slides here. They're great. They're succinct. You can take a look at them, but keep them handy for reference during the monitoring process. And so to kick it off on this one, policies and procedures. Subrecipients must have ESG specific internal policies and procedures. Written standards. What's the difference between written standards and policies and procedures? These references help right here. And you can always ask us as well. Financial policies, conflict of interest policies, and the big topics that we've covered before, duplication of benefits. Next slide, please. And the record keeping, this is a big one, record keeping requirements. You can take a look in terms of eligibility, in terms of subrecipient monitoring, those subrecipients who use contractors, this is very important for you, and financial costs and expenses. As subrecipients, when you're using those subrecipients, they're held to the same federal, state, and contractual requirements that are outlined in the ESG program manual and in the contract between your organization and HCD. So sometimes this can be a big surprise to folks that they aren't aware that they're supposed to be keeping track of their subrecipients or contractors. So let us know if you have any questions on that. We'd be happy to assist. Next slide, please. And here are some more programmatic elements, issues in terms of rapid rehousing. Biggest thing we run into is eligibility, improperly categorized intake or no standardized intake procedures. This slide can help with that. The ESG program manual can help with that. Documentation of services. As you've heard Gordon, Chris, David Munoz all say it over and over again. Documentation, documentation, document everything and keep them in the files, because that's the first thing we're going to look at. And sometimes we have folks who say, I was going to, but then I never got back to it. But I know this is what I did. This is what I did. And I say, we realize that and we believe you, but that doesn't matter when we're doing this. HUD is going to hold us to that same standard. Where's the documentation? And we can't say, well, so-and-so said that so-and-so was doing it, so we're okay with that. No, that doesn't work. We'd get a nice, nasty little letter from HUD. So. And also reevaluation. Annual reevaluation is required for participants enrolled in a project for at least 1 year. And we see a lot that's not being done. So make sure to take care of that. And once again, all these slides, questions, come see us, contact your rep, go to the NOFA inbox, look at your program manual. Rental assistance. So these are some of the biggest things we run into and that are required. We'll be closely reviewing client files associated with the RFFs that we're reviewing. And so this serves as a great example of some of the documentation that's required in a program participant client file. The rental assistance agreement, the rent reasonableness calculation, more on that in a second, the VAWA information, lead-based paint, visual assessment, duplication of benefits, just a snapshot. It's a lot of documentation, we know, but it's very clearly explained in the documentation that we provide for you in the program manual and in the component elements on our resource page. It's also, a lot of this is in the contract between HCD and the subrecipients. In addition to this slide, we also have a client file checklist on the ESG homepage under the resources tab. And there's also great stuff in the forms tab. And next slide, please. Here's, see here. See, we should be on the, I'm sorry, I may be a slide behind. I'm looking at street outreach. Okay, I'm sorry if I was on the wrong slide on that last one. As I said, I'm looking at 3 different screens as I do this. So street outreach, verification of homelessness, and the client files need to have documentation of services, assistance being provided. And let's go to the next slide, please. Emergency shelter. Once again, verification of homelessness. Client files have to have the documentation of the services assistance being provided. And next slide, please, for HP eligibility. Another big one, improper housing status or no housing status identified. This slide can help you with that, and it's a great little refresher and very succinct. Next slide, please. Allowable costs. And rental arrears for rapid housing, rehousing, big one what we run into as well. It cannot exceed 6 months of arrears. If it does, it'll be deemed an ineligible expense. And if it wasn't caught, you know, it's from contract year 2020, it wasn't caught. That is something that our finance department will be looking to be reimbursed for. And next slide. Fair market rent. This is a big one. Fair market rent and rent reasonableness. And client files are often missing the FMR assessment, or the FMR assessment is based on the wrong federal fiscal year. So take a look at the slide. The values are set by HUD, and they every county and area MSA has its own FMR. They're very straightforward, and the stipulations to meet this requirement are right there. Gross rent cannot exceed FMR for annual ESG appropriated for federal fiscal year 2021 and forward. And I won't read the second one. I'll let you do that. Next slide, please, for rent reasonableness. And as mentioned, these previous slides, these are the big ones. And so we're kind of giving you a head start here. This is what to look out for. This is what we're going to be reviewing. And rent reasonableness is a big one. So make sure that you have the proper documentation, calculations, and the client files. So when we're reviewing them, it's fairly straightforward. We will always contact you if we have any questions. And next slide, please. We're going to go back to the, that is a set of resources. This will be very helpful in addressing the common themes we just discussed. In addition, as I mentioned over and over again, there's the ESG homepage under the resources tab, as well as the forms tab. And you can always reach out to us to your annual representative or the NOFA inbox. Next slide. And Kristen, if you could go ahead and just scroll through so all of them are up. So going back to the timeline in terms of next step, we're circling back. As mentioned before, I'll be reaching out to those of you who will be monitored this year and to set up the kickoff meetings. Next week, the intent to monitor letters will be going out, and that will contain all of the information. And at the kickoff meeting, we will go through all of the information contained in the letter, everything that we will be looking at, all the resources that you'll have at your disposal, the process, the timeline, any questions that you might have, we're happy to answer, and we'll cover it all there. And as mentioned before, this is an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing process. We're not going to have the kickoff meeting and then just leave you hanging. We'll be right there to hold your hand all the way through the process within reason. And so if you have any questions, of course, you can always reach out. And next slide, that concludes the presentation. We go into a Q&A period now. The only challenge I'm going to have is I'm going to have to read them on the screen, and I will either try and answer or type the response to another staff member to answer. Thank you.
And Anthony, I'm here as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. Our manager, fearless leader, is here, and she can provide a lot of information as well.
He gives me way too much credit.
And so did we have any questions to start at? Yes, these slides will be sent. I'm sorry, I'm just jumping right in. Will these slides be found online? We're going to send these out as we do every week. And so if you're registered, you should be getting these slides. Our consultants will send those out. It should sometimes as soon as this afternoon, but definitely this week. And I see the answers there. Great. And
Sarah, would you like to go ahead and start with the first question that we had from Micah?
Sure can. I'm loving your hair, by the way.
Thank you.
So it says for fiscal year 21 state ESG, what's the closeout deadline? This has been reiterated pretty much every week in office hours for the last year. The expenditure deadline is August 31st. So you cannot incur any type of cost past August 31st, which is 8 days from today. And the last RFF, the last RFF has to be received in eCivis to us no later than October 10th, because we have to have all documentation to close out the entire contract by the 17th. So we will not accept RFFs on the 11th, on the 12th. They have to be received by the 10th. This gives ample time for our accounting department to process everything to get you paid. Let's go to the next one. It says regarding the match supporting documentation that was requested as part of the APR cost workbook, can you confirm if there are specific types of documentation that you are looking for? Yes, and that was actually on that APR workbook. I sent links. I specifically embedded links to our match policy and documentation. But if you need more in-depth information, then we can always give that to you. I have a list of specific documents based on HUD guidance. So just email us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov, and we'll be happy to get that entire list over to you. Of course, it's not going to be all inclusive, as everything with HUD. There's still a little left for interpretation. Right, LaQuantia? All right, let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to go through the whole thing here. Last monitor we had, we didn't have any feedback or communication or chances to upload anything that was missing until the letter was sent out about the findings. Can we have more communication this year, please? Yes. And I am sorry if that happened last year. We were still very new with monitoring as well. So we're getting better and we're learning just like you all are. So bear with us. And I'm sorry for any confusion and frustration. I know that we were all very, we had growing pains along with you. So we're hoping that this year's monitoring is going to go a lot smoother. I know Anthony has been working really, really hard with ICF to try and come up with processes. We're trying to implement the same type of monitoring that ICF has done with all of the CD contracts. So it should be pretty smooth. From Trisha, is there a time frame date of this upcoming monitoring that's being reviewed for client files? I might have missed it if it was stated already. And I believe that Anthony put the timeline up there. We are sampling client files for every single RFF. So you should have already been requesting that your rep should have already been requesting client files, especially if you have HP or RR. Those should already be coming in. Anthony, I can't remember the timeline off the top of my head. What is the timeline for annual monitoring? But remember, this doesn't supersede what the mini monitoring is. I mean, they're still going to go hand in hand. We're still going to continue to do mini monitoring regardless of whether you're having your annual monitoring done. The annual monitoring that we're going to be doing is going to be for the 2020 contracts. So just to make that clear. Sorry, Anthony, go ahead. Is he stuck?
I don't think he's stuck. He probably just can't hear you. He can't.
I believe that the timeline stated that within the next couple of weeks, whoever is being monitored will start receiving those kickoff letters and appointments. I believe that there's 10 contracts that we chose out of the 2020. And depending on how that goes, then we may choose additional. It's going to depend on the timing, but we want to make sure that we do a thorough monitoring of at least the 10 that we did.
Okay, I just dropped that in the chat. So hopefully Anthony will answer that for us.
Got it.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
I'm not sure if this has been answered or not. I just received a message. Is there a time frame or dates of this upcoming monitoring that's being reviewed? And in terms of time frame, it might be related to the other question. The contract year that we will be reviewing is 2020. In terms of the time frame, the dates, we went over that twice in the slides. It's going to be approximately August through the beginning of December. The monitoring will be a process that takes place in the upcoming months. We may be finished a little sooner. It might be a little later in December, but it's generally going to be from next week through the first week of December. That answers your question in terms of time frame and dates. They're all laid out right there on the slides. And I'll leave that next question to Sarah.
Sarah, it's been dropped in the chat from Micah.
So the application will be up today, and the only additional file that you should be working with would be the the rest of them are all going to be certifications, and those are built in the app, so no, I can't email those. It would be the government tax ID form or the STD 204 if you're a nonprofit, which I know you're not, Micah. And then it's going to be I believe it's the Stella outcomes. The rest of the information's all built completely into the app. So, and I already have confirmation from eCivis that they will have everything working this afternoon. I will send an email out to all of our COCs that fall under the COC application side so that they are aware that it is working. And then I will be working with upper management to see if we will be extending the deadline or not, because I had already built in extra days for the deadline to begin with in case we did have some issues. But there should not be any additional files that you would need, Micah, unless you're asking about something specific that I'm not aware of, but I built the app, so I should know.
Awesome. That's looking like all the questions we have right now. Are we sure? Is there anyone else that would like to ask a question? Come off mute or drop it in the chat. Of course, if not, we don't want to hold you. We can give you 5 minutes back in your day, as we say.
I want to plug, though, that we do have our webinars. I'm sure it was already mentioned in the very beginning, but I'm going to plug it again. We have our webinars that are coming up on the 29th. So if you have not registered already, please feel free to do so. If you're having an issue with registering, please make sure that you reach out to the ESG NOFA box. And I promise, Micah, I will email you as soon as that application comes online. What is the formula for the one-time HP allocation? There is, you know what? I am not going to lie and say that I know this. Is Connie on here?
Connie is on here.
Yes.
I was going to try and wing it, Connie, but I didn't.
So that's a really good question. So the one-time HP NOFA is approximately $1.7 million from disencumbered funds. There will be no formula run. It's going to be first come, first serve over the counter. And we are starting with a maximum amount that you can apply for $200,000. And we will, as again, everything has to be a complete app and everything that goes into a complete app resolution. So if you're thinking about it, start working on the resolutions and so forth. And we'll just keep awarding until we run out of funds. And that's how that's going to work. Now, if it turns out we have some really fast spenders that are doing a great job with that, we may end up adding some more money to that contract. But right now, we're going to put a maximum limit of $200,000 per contract starting out the gate, and hoping that we'll get a lot of interest in this. So it will not be a formula run. It's going to be whoever's interested that comes in and is approved.
Connie, there's another one, but I did want to touch on that. Is there a minimum for the HP?
I believe we set the minimum at 75,000.
Okay. And then it says, can the resolution be piggybacked with the fiscal year 2023 NOFA?
No. And the reason being, it's a different funding. So you need to come with a separate resolution, keeping in mind that unlike the annual NOFA that comes out, we allow you to do a draft resolution. We just can't, if you get awarded, we won't execute a contract. If you send in a draft resolution with your application when this HP NOFA is released, we will pull you out of that over-the-counter line until your resolution has been approved by your board and us. So, for example, you come in, we open the NOFA up on X date, you hit the button and you're number 2 in line, but you have a draft resolution. We're going to pull you out of the line, right back to you and say, hey, this needs to be finalized. When it comes back and it's approved and we approve it, we'll put you back in line for wherever that line may be at that point and however many applicants at that point. So it does need to be its own resolution.
And then there's one from Micah that says, is there a standardized template for the draft resolution that we can review?
So we're going to use the same resolutions that everybody's used to. They're on our website. If you are a unit of local government, then you would use that COC resolution template. If you're coming in as a nonprofit, then you would use the resolution template under the balance of state. And that is on our ESG webpage. If you're not quite sure, send an email to the NOFA box, or you can send it to me and we'll send that draft template, that draft resolution template out to you.
All right, Connie. Well, thank you for jumping in there and answering those questions for us. We're at time. We thank you all for being here today, and thank you even more for your questions. Please let us know if there's any feedback that you'd like to have or to give us about any other training sessions or anything that has been provided or that you need provided, and we'll do our best to accommodate those. In the meantime, thanks again, and we will see you all next week.